try to be as active as I can on Twitter and on Slack, even though I try to distance from social media. Okay, let's jump straight into it. The history of Dagger. For those of you who haven't been around for many years, that's a very short history. The very first Dagger was DI framework. The DI stands for dependency injection. The very first Dagger was dependency injection framework from Square. It used reflection. It was a kind of nice framework, but kind of old-fashioned one. And then Google adopted it from Square. I'm not sure what's the deal was there, but Dagger was transferred to Google. Google started to developing it, and they released Dagger 2, which is what we use today. It's basically annotation processor code generation based dependency injection framework. Then about 4 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, Google released an addition to Dagger called Dagger Android. And that was a very bad move, in my opinion. I was criticizing this addition from the very onset. And luckily today, I think we can kind of say that it's dead or on its way to be dead. And very lately, like about several months ago, Google released Hilt, which is yet another framework in the Dagger family, but it's not an extension, it's an abstraction over Dagger 2. And abstraction means that Hilt, when you use Hilt, it kind of hides Dagger from you underneath. And that's actually the topic of our today's session. So my plan for today. First of all, I will show you how to migrate the tutorial application from Dagger 2 to Hilt. That's a huge chunk of content, and I will be speaking really quickly to fit it in. Then we will discuss what Hilt brings to the table. What's the advantages, what's the drawbacks? A very interesting question that I'm sure many developers and even teams or businesses ask themselves at this point: should I refactor or adopt Hilt for my projects? And then those of you who know me probably know that I'm conspiracies guy. So we will discuss some future developments that I predict in Hilt ecosystem. And lastly, if time permits, and it will not, I'm sure, I will tell you a little bit about my own stuff. So let's get straight to it. First of all, the source code of the tutorial application is on GitHub. You can get it, but don't spend your time on it right now. After I will continue the refactoring, I will push all this live coding stuff upstream, and then you will be able to get the tutorial application together with all the additional refactorings that I will do right now. So let's review the tutorial application. It's a very simple application. Those of you who already took my courses probably know it. That's just Stack Overflow browser. We have a list of questions, and latest questions from Stack Overflow can pull down to refresh, click on a question, and I get a user picture, username, and whatever user asks. That's all, nothing more here. You will notice that there is just black questions and there are these, I don't know, cyan questions. And the cyan ones are basically the same exact screen, but under the hood, these cyan ones use view model. So the black questions, black details activity, you will see it in a moment, is implemented in what I call model view controller. And these ones are implemented using model view model, or just Google's view model but architectural component, whatever it's called. Okay, I don't use them, so I'm kind of confused. Now let's jump into the straight into the source code. By the way, I don't see you. Usually when I give presentations, I kind of try to adjust my tempos based on the how confused my audience appears to be. Since I don't see you, if you really lose me, then please write in chat, and Sean here helps me to manage this thing. So he will let me know that I need to slow down a bit. So what do we have in our application? There's quite a bit of stuff here, but related to our discussion today, refactoring from Dagger 2 to Hilt, we mostly will look at presentation layer stuff, at screens. So we have questions list activity. That's a very simple activity that simply shows one fragment. The reason why I do that is because I want to show you demonstration of how you work with fragments as well. There is really no reason to do it this way in your own code, so don't copy that. And we have questions list fragment, which is actually responsible for showing the list of questions on the screen. And then we have question details activity and question details VM activity. VM activity uses view model. You know, if you use view model, you know that you have view model factory, and then somewhere here, right here, you will use this view model factory to get a reference to question details view model. And I think I already see a problem here, maybe. No, that's okay. So we have 3 activities and 1 fragment, and that's what we want to refactor. Now you will notice that activities and fragment, all of them use Dagger already, and they use it according to the approach that I've been using for the past 5 years. So each of them calls this injector.inject in its own create, whether it's activity or fragment, injector.inject, and injector is simply presentation component. Now, presentation component, where are you? Presentation component is a very simple Dagger component. It's sub-component, and it uses these 2 modules, presentation module and view model module. Since it's sub-component, presentation component must have a parent. If you know Dagger, you know that. And the parent is activity component. Okay, activity component and new presentation component, that's the way you do that. And activity component is also a sub-component. It uses activity module, but it's a sub-component, so it must have a parent as well. And its parent is app component. That's the top level component of my application. And to show you all of that graphically, then basically we discuss what we look at is the following scheme. We have app component that uses app module, and that's our application scope. We have activity component and activity module, and that's activity scope. And we have presentation component that uses these 2 modules, and that's presentation scope. Sometimes I call it controller scope, or in more general terms, it's just unscoped dependencies we provide from here. And at the end of this chain, we have activities and fragments. All they know is that they fetch their dependencies from presentation component, and all the additional complexity is kind of abstracted out from activities and fragments. Okay, so they don't know about this structure, but this structure exists to provide dependencies with different scoping. If you don't know what scoping is, don't worry, it's not very important in the context of this talk. All right, that's what we have right now. And now I want to migrate this application from Dagger 2 to Hilt. And I will do it very quickly. I don't have really time for that, so I'll just rush through it. Don't worry, if you kind of miss some details or nuance, don't worry about that. That's not the topic of this talk, okay? If you want to migrate your application to Hilt, there's very good documentation. You can just watch this talk later, put me on, I don't know, 0.5 speed and watch it again. I will just rush through it, and I will do it actually in a way that you will probably do it yourself if you ever want to adopt Hilt. I will just start migrating, and I will see all these errors, and at every stage, I will explain you what the error says and how do I solve it. So hopefully this sounds reasonable to you. And now let's get to migration of this application to Hilt. The first thing we do is we go to build Gradle, of course, and import some dependencies. I just copy paste because I don't have time. I prepared everything ahead of time. First of all, the current Hilt version is this one. And once I want to use Hilt, I will also need this additional plugin. This plugin is not mandatory, but Google recommends us to use it. We will maybe discuss it later towards the end of this talk. All right, once I set up my full project's app Gradle, I will go into the build Gradle of my individual module. And here what I want to do is, first of all, apply that plugin. So go up here, drop this plugin here, and then I will need additional dependencies. That's the interesting part. Okay, so in order to use Hilt in your app, you need, first of all, this dependency, Hilt Android, and then you need Hilt compiler. And Hilt compiler is annotation processor. So you need all these Dagger standard stuff, and in addition, you will need these two dependencies. All right, once you do that, you click on Sync Now. Hopefully, Android Studio does not crash, and we can proceed. Now, once I set up these dependencies, nothing happened in my app. To actually start using Hilt, I will go to my application class. That's the custom class that you use as your application. And I will throw Hilt Android app annotation at it. Once I did that, I try to rebuild my app. I will start seeing all kinds of errors probably, because now Hilt kicks in and starts to verify my setup. So first of all, Hilt tells me activity module. Activity module is missing an install in annotation. And that's one of the, well, first of all, let's understand how Hilt works in general. Hilt is based, just like the standard Dagger, is based on the idea of components, and it actually kind of hard codes structure of subcomponents internally. You don't see them. They are provided by the framework, but these are the components that Hilt comes with out of the box. And as you see, something here is very similar to the diagram that you've already seen, basically how I set up my Dagger, how I set up Dagger in my own apps. Singleton component is basically app component. It used to be called, when Hilt just released, application component, but then they renamed it to singleton component. Activity retained component is something that will be retained on configuration changes. They use it for view models, for example, if I'm not mistaken. Service component, well, services. Activity component for activities. Fragment component, view component, view. Okay, I think these three, fragment, view, and view with fragment, I don't see any reason to use them unless you already use something similar in your app and you just want to migrate your legacy code to Hilt. So that's the structure. And my goal now is to refactor from my explicit components that I have right now in my app to use these Hilt's implicit components. You will understand why I say that they're implicit in just a moment. Well, actually, you'll understand that right now. So what does this error tells me? It tells me the following. I need to go, first of all, as you see, Hilt opens the wrong, it opens activity module, but the generated code, I don't need that. I need my activity module. So Hilt tells me the following. Currently, you use activity module from your activity component, right? Activity component points to activity module. Hilt tells me, no, you need to specify in your module in which component it should be installed. I do it using this install in annotation and specify activity component. Now I have my activity component. Come take your chance, Dagger 2 course. Okay, that's a mistake. I just copy pasted it. But actually what I want to use is Hilt's Android component. So activity component that comes from Hilt. And then class, of course. Once I did that, I will basically not need my own activity component anymore. So common dependency injection, activity component, I won't need that. So I will just remove it. And activity scope, we will deal with this thing in a moment. Yeah, I fixed this error. Let's try to build my app again. And another error, app module, and is missing install in. The same thing, okay? Hilt tells me, I discovered a module in your code, and it discovers module based on these module annotations, but this module does not specify where you want to install it. So you go install in, and in which component? You can use application component from Hilt. That was its previous name, but currently they call it singleton component. I discovered that just today. So next error, or maybe Hilt will just compile. No, app module. Modules that need to be instantiated by Hilt must have a visible empty constructor. Okay, that's the error I get now. What's the problem here? Well, in my Dagger setup, when I use this app module, I injected application object into it. And I call these dependencies bootstrapping dependencies. These are basically the services, the dependencies that you cannot instantiate yourself. You need to kind of inject them initially into your modules to bootstrap your entire objects graph. And application is one of them. You don't instantiate Android application object yourself. You get it from the Android framework. So I injected it into this module, but Hilt tells me, no, buddy, I work differently. I don't want any constructor arguments. I want it like that. But then I will run into a problem, right? Because I expose this application object that I injected into this app module to the entire object graph. So you can assume that somewhere it will be used. Someone needs this application. And currently I removed it. So how will I provide this application? And it turns out that Hilt takes care of that for me. So we have all these implicit components. And if you scroll down, by the way, that's Hilt, dagger.dev Hilt. That's the documentation for Hilt. If you scroll down, you will discover this table, component default bindings. What it tells you is that if you use singleton component, basically application component, in other words, you get application by default. So implicitly, Hilt already injects application object into your object graph in singleton component. In activity component, you get additional activity. In service component, you additionally get service, etc. So what it basically says is that I can just remove this provider for application object and everything will work because Hilt injects that object for me. Let's try to build my app again. And yet another error. Presentation module is missing and install in annotation. Okay, this will be a tricky one, so I will just quickly tell you about it. Presentation module and in general presentation component, as we told, it doesn't have any kind of analogy in Hilt. There is no activity component, and then I have fragment and view. It's split in fragment and view, and that's not what I use in my own apps. So this presentation component and its associated presentation module has no analogy, and I will just remove them because currently the only thing I use this presentation module for is to provide this saved state registry owner. And that is being used only inside view model factory. Okay, so if you work with view models, you probably know that view model factory needs this saved state registry owner if you want to use saved state handle with your view model. I use it in my tutorial application just for the sake of increasing complexity and making the code harder to read, and also to show you how to work with it in case you do it yourself. But I actually don't need this going further, and you will understand why when we get to this point with Hilt. Hilt makes working with view models much simpler. So I won't need my presentation component, and furthermore, I won't need my presentation module, and therefore I won't need my presentation scope. And I have this view model module, which was also used in presentation component. And I provided my view models using multi-binding convention, very complex and unnecessary stuff that Dagger supports. And when you use view models, you need to resolve to this kind of hacks, ugly code. But actually with Hilt, it will be much simpler and I won't need to do that. So I can remove this entire module. I can remove view model key since I won't use multi-bindings anymore. And then I can remove the entire view model package, presentation package, sorry. So basically with Hilt, there is no such stuff as presentation, and I don't need to take care of view model stuff myself. You will understand how Hilt deals with this stuff a bit later. Okay, next error is service module. Service module is missing installing annotation. Okay, reasonable. Let's go to service module. And service module is a module. And of course, we want to install it inside one of the predefined components that Hilt comes with. And that's, of course, service component. I have my own service component, but what I actually need to use is this Hilt's service component. And once I did that, I can remove my own service component because it will not be needed anymore. Let's try to build the app. Hopefully it will at some point just compile and run because I ran out of time. Okay, service module, once again, we deal with service module. Modules that need to be instantiated must have visible empty constructor. We have already seen that, right? We have a service module and I injected service into it as a bootstrapping dependency. I can do that with Hilt. Hilt requires no constructors, but then I can't provide reference to a service on my object graph. So no problem. Let's go back to this diagram, to this table. Service component by default provides service as an implicit binding. So you get it for free and therefore I don't need to provide it myself. So I can just remove all of that. Okay, let's see whether it compiles. No. Members injection method may only return injected type or void, non-existent new service component. Okay, So let's just go and remove all my components. App component, I won't need it. I'm using singleton component from Hilt, activity component gone, presentation gone, service gone, and probably I will have a bunch of compile errors. Yep, inside my application. I don't need this, and I don't need to construct my components myself. When you use Hilt, you get all these default components from the framework. They're implicitly present, and you don't need to deal with them. Once again, I don't need all of that. Base service class, and let's go to base activity as well. I won't need all these components. Okay, all these components, that's kind of a boilerplate. Hilt removes that completely. Fragment component, base fragment, right? That's the one that I want to see. No need for that. And let's try, okay, this one I need to remove as well. Okay, let's try to compile the code now. As you see, I remove a lot of code with Hilt, and all of that is kind of boilerplate setup that I mostly just copy paste between applications from one application to another because it's really mindless stuff. Okay, great. And now we come to this point. We have, okay, let me remind you what we have currently. If I go to my application, I have this annotation Hilt Android app, and Hilt started to work. But at the end of the day, I want to inject stuff into my activities and fragments. For example, question details activity, right? I want to inject stuff into this activity, but I don't have these components, so I can't call this inject. How do I go about that? Well, I throw at my activities and fragments Android entry point annotation, and then I can remove that. What this annotation does is Hilt does its magic behind the scenes, and then during the call to super on create, implicitly Hilt will call the same method that I've just deleted. Okay, this method inject into this question details activity. Hilt will call it. Hilt will take care of that for me once I annotate the activity with Android entry point, and I need to do that for all my activities and fragments. Android entry point. Let's see, activity.kt. Now, questions list activity is very interesting case because I don't inject into this activity. Okay, there are no inject annotated properties here. It looks like I don't need this annotation on this activity, so I won't add it, but I will need it later. Question list fragment, I inject stuff into this fragment, so I remove this injection method, and then I can remove this entire override completely. Just don't forget to throw this Android entry point on this fragment. Okay, let's see what will be the next problem. A lot of errors. Okay, cannot find symbol fetch question. Okay, that's just compilation problem. What's here? Okay, first of all, I need to remove this, of course, and then fetch question details use case. What do you complain about? Question details activity. No, everything is fine. Let's try once again. Okay, different error. Incompatibility scope binding. Okay, my application Hilt components singleton C is singleton component scoped with add singleton may not reference bindings with different scopes. Okay, what it says is the following. When you use these components that Hilt implicitly provides to you, you get scopes automatically, again, implicitly. Singleton component uses this singleton scope. Activity component uses activity scope, etc. Every component has its own scope. But since I used, and all of these scopes are Hilt scopes, except for singleton, which is kind of JavaX inject standard scope. And since I used my own implementation using Dagger 2, I rolled out my own scopes. And what Hilt tells me is that, hey, pal, for example, if you go to app module, you use this app scope here, you can do that because singleton component uses singleton scope. So you will need to kind of use Hilt's scopes. There are two ways to solve this problem. First of all, I can just refactor all this, rename all these app scopes to singleton, and this will work. But I don't like singletons. I think singletons are very bad naming. I don't want singletons in my app. I don't want to confuse less experienced developers who might think that singleton is somehow all right to use. So I want to keep it app scope. If you want to keep your own annotations, Hilt provides the following facility. You can do alias of, and then say that this AppScope annotation is basically just alias to a singleton class. Okay, class. And then Hilt will understand that whenever I use AppScope, I really mean just singleton. And then we have a bunch of similar stuff. Activity components scoped with this, blah, blah, blah. It's basically the same thing. Let's go to activity component. Where are you? Activity module, activity module. Activity module uses my own activity scope, right? And I can solve it with this alias as well. But in this case, okay, this activity scope is very similar to Hilt's activity scope. So I don't think it will be reasonable for me to keep my own activity scope. So I want to remove that. Let's just see where I use that. That's the generated code, activity module, and image loader. So image loader is something that I use to load images, uses glide, as you see, under the hood. That's just a very useful abstraction for your applications. And all I want to do is to refactor to activity scoped and remove activity scope. And then I'll go to activity module and again, just change this to activity scope. And then I can go, sorry, and remove activity scope altogether. Okay, once again, I kept AppScope because I think it's just better naming, and I refactored, I use Hilt's activity scope instead of mine. Was companion fragment manager. Okay, let's go up. Dagger missing app compat activity. Okay, that's a very interesting stuff. Once again, Hilt provides some default bindings, but in activity component, you get activity. In your application, most probably you use activity X, you use this kind of support framework on steroids. So you actually need app compat activity and not just standard activity. I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure that Hilt will add that at some point, but currently I'm not aware of any out of the box facility. So we will need to do it manually. So provide app compat activity, and then I use activity, standard activity, please. And I just return that activity casted to app compat activity. You might think that it's ugly, but it will work. Yeah, a bit of working around some Hilt's limitations. Okay, missing binding, and this ugly, very ugly stuff. This ugly stuff comes from View Model Factory. That's my, if you ever used Dagger's multi-binding, then you know that you're familiar with this map. And Hilt tells me, you know, pal, you don't have it on your objects graph. And that's reasonable because I removed presentation module and view models module, which took care of multi-bindings. And now the question is, what do I do about this view model factory? And the answer is that in Hilt, you don't need that. Hilt takes care of that for me. So I can just go here and remove this altogether. Just delete this factory. I won't need it. Next problem, missing binding. Non-existent class. Okay, that's just probably, let's see in which activity it's the problem. Question details VM activity. Question details VM activity. Here I use this view model factory. There is none anymore. And now the interesting point. Usually when you want to instantiate, to inject view models that have additional constructor arguments, your constructor arguments, you must use view model factory. That's how Dagger, standard Dagger works, Dagger 2. Hilt works differently. When you use Hilt, you use this form of view model provider without the factory, and you can still inject this view model with additional custom constructor arguments. But it will not work out of the box, either now or a bit later, and I will show you how to. Unresolved reference view model factory. Yes, that's just an error. Okay, something compiles. This looks much better, right, folks? Yeah, build successful. So let's actually install this application. Where's my emulator? Okay, I lost my emulator. Now, here it is. Okay, and I don't see the application. I don't see it because it probably just crashed. Hilt fragments must be attached to Android entry point activity. Remember, folks, I told you that I have this questions list activity, which doesn't have any properties injected using Dagger. So it looks like I can avoid having this Android entry point annotation here, but in practice I can't, because if I use this activity to show any fragment which uses Android entry point, then the activity itself must also use it, and that's what you get. You get a runtime crash if you don't do that. So just throw this annotation on all your activities. I think this won't do any harm. Yeah, the application started. Cool, it works. It works. Boom. If I go to view model screen, everything crashes. Okay, I have 5 minutes to explain how to work with view models. And if you've ever used Dagger 2 with view models, you will realize that explaining that in 5 minutes is absolutely impossible. But with Hilt, it actually becomes maybe possible. So how do we work with view models? I currently have this view model, question details view model, and I don't have a factory for it. Remember, I removed it, but I still try to inject it in my question VM activity. Okay, somewhere here, I try to inject it. And standard Dagger crashes because it tells, hey, pal, you try to inject this view model with custom arguments, constructor arguments. I don't know how to instantiate it, so I crash your app, take care of that. And in Hilt, if you want to use view models, you need a little bit more magic. So let's go to build Gradle of my module. And I will need to use, okay, first of all, let's go to documentation. If you want to use your Hilt with additional companies, view model or work manager, you need to read this article, Hilt and Jetpack integrations. It will tell you what to do and why to do that, but I will just quickly show you it right now. In addition to these Dagger dependencies, I import a Hilt lifecycle view model. That's the latest version as for today. And then I import Android X Hilt compiler. That's the latest version as of today. Sync everything and go back to our view model. So currently I inject this view model using this @inject standard Dagger annotation. To make use of Hilt's magic, I need to use view model inject. That's the new annotation in Hilt. Whenever you import these dependencies, you get access to this annotation. So for view models, you use that. And then I will install my application. And I will go to this screen and my application will crash again. What's the problem, man? What's the problem? And it will tell me Kotlin uninitialized property access exception. That's a very tricky name to tell me basically null pointer exception, because in Kotlin we don't have null pointer exceptions, of course, so we need to mask that. But the issues, the problem here is the following. I used my own save state view model, and it has this init method, which my factory that I just deleted, I remind you, called. Now no one calls this method, therefore no one injects save state handle into this view model, and everything crashes. So first of all, I don't need my own save state view model anymore, so I can just remove this package entirely. Yeah, go, don't need you. But then there's a problem, okay? Because currently I'm using here this save state handle, and with Dagger, if I can't inject it into the as a method injection, I will need to use constructor injection, right? So save state handle, private val, of course. And as you know, and I can just move that to here and then remove that altogether. Later init var, let's just make it val. But as you know, this will be a problem, okay? If you know Dagger and you use view models with save state handle and Dagger, you probably already get kind of fear response, because you know what's coming, right? Assisted injection, the cracks, the frightful and terrible assisted injection. So in Dagger, it was really ugly and very difficult. In Hilt, it's very simple, at least with view models, okay? There's no assisted injection in general, but when we discuss view models and we want to inject save state handle into its constructor, we can just use assisted. And that's maybe the most magical of all Hilt's conventions. There's a lot of machinery behind this simple assisted convention, but once I use it, once I annotate save state handle with this @assisted, everything will just work. So let's start my application again. And Yanju asked this question. And at this point, in just about 25 minutes, I migrated my application to Hilt. Now everything works. So let's just, okay, a lot of files changed, of course. Let's commit it, migrate from Dagger to Hilt. Live, yeah, baby. Okay, let's just maybe push it, and now you can go to GitHub and download the source code, and you will get the initial state and also the refactored code. So you will be able to see how I implemented it using Dagger 2, and you will be able to see how I implemented it using Hilt, and all of that in 20 minutes. How cool is that? So let's jump back into my presentation and let's understand what I did. Hilt comes with this implicit predefined component. One of them is singleton component. And singleton component, I use it with app module. And app module, I remind you that when I used just Dagger, the components kind of pointed to modules. Components specified which modules they use. Hilt uses so-called dependency inversion. Okay, Hilt inverts the dependencies, source, at least compile time dependencies between the components, and now modules will need to specify in which components they are installed. However, since singleton component is kind of implicit and abstract, I can get a reference to it. So how do I specify that? Well, I use this at installing annotation, and this is my application scope. The same for activity component, activity module, install in, and then I manage to push this activity module into abstract activity component. That's my application scope. Now, I don't have presentation scope. I just have activities and fragments there. So how do I bridge between my activities and fragments to these abstract components, which I can't get a reference to these components. They're kind of hidden inside Hilt, inside the framework. So I just use this Android entry point. That's where magic happens. I throw Android entry point at my activities and fragments, and behind the scenes, Hilt does all its magic to make it work. Okay, most importantly, Hilt pros and cons. The benefit is that Hilt provides better conventions than Dagger Android. It's not difficult. Dagger Android was absolutely horrible, so that's not a big thing. It simplifies, as you've seen, it simplifies by a lot handling of view model and save state handle. So if you are using view models, then you will probably like Hilt because you don't need this multi-binding and you don't need to deal with assisted injection yourself. Much simpler. I just don't use view models, so that's not my problem. Standardization. That's, in my opinion, one of the biggest benefits. Once the entire ecosystem refactors to Hilt, you will be able to hire developers from other projects and they will actually understand your DI setup, because currently every project kind of reinvents its own way to integrate Dagger. Also, Hilt has some support for integration, user UI, and end-to-end testing. I don't know much about that, haven't used that, so that's kind of just citing the documentation here. And Hilt indeed has better documentation than Dagger or Dagger Android, but in my estimation, that's not a benefit of Hilt. That's just kind of Dagger's documentation. What has always been its biggest problem. The drawbacks of Hilt is that it requires additional annotation processor out of the box, right? You need additional annotation processor to use Hilt. And then if you want to use it with view models, you add one additional annotation. So you will end up with 3 different annotation processors in your application. And as you know, like on bigger Android projects, build times are problem. And when you use annotation processors, your build times get longer. And it's especially problematic if you use Kotlin. So if you use Kotlin and you use Hilt, you will have 3 annotation and view models. You will have 3 annotation processors, and no one, for now at least, no one shared any kind of benchmark how Hilt performs in bigger projects. I tested it on my own pet projects, about 15,000 lines of code. It didn't matter much, Hilt, as opposed to Dagger 2, but I guess that as you go to bigger, more serious projects, let's say above 60, 100,000 lines of code, I expect that to have an impact, major impact. As you've seen, it's very simple to integrate Hilt. It provides very useful conventions out of the box, but once you will get to non-trivial cases, complexity starts leaking out. And for example, if you use Fragment Factory in your app, you will need to deal with custom entry points. Gradle plugin, it's optional, but Google kind of recommends using it. I'm not sure it's good. I mean, whatever you make, whenever you complicate your Gradle setup, it's not good in my opinion. And here is in very early alpha, so it's immature. So do you need to migrate to Hilt right now? Well, I can't answer this question for you. I personally don't think Hilt brings any benefits to me. Okay, as you've seen, my own setup you can use with Dagger 2, vanilla Dagger 2. I've been doing that for years. It's very similar to what Hilt brings me out of the box. So taking on additional annotation processors is not something that I'm going to do, especially given I'm not using view models myself. So that benefit is kind of irrelevant for me. So I'm not going to use Hilt, and I never adopted Dagger Android. If you use Dagger Android, in my estimation, you are already writing legacy code. I don't see future for Dagger Android. Therefore, if you are using Dagger Android, you might start thinking about migrating either back to Dagger 2 as preliminary step to Hilt, or straight to Hilt if you have like maybe not a very big project. And lastly, I know that we are about to finish, but lastly, if Hilt doesn't bring anything new, and it indeed doesn't bring anything new, there's a lot of magic, view model stuff, all that, but nothing really new, nothing fundamentally different with Hilt. So why Google pushes it so hard? Okay, folks, put your tinfoil hat on, because conspiracy incoming, and I predict that Hilt will be cross-platform dependency injection framework that will support Kotlin multi-platform projects. In my estimation, that's the only reason that's the only viable, reasonable reason to have Hilt, in my estimation. So don't be surprised if you will hear over the course of the next, let's say 6 months, that Hilt kind of pivots to Kotlin multi-platform and supports dependency injection in iOS. Sorry, we won't have time to discuss my stuff, but hopefully you enjoyed this session. I know that you need to run to the next session. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate that you took time to attend and listen to my very quick, very quick speaking on this session. And now I think if you are not rushing to the next session, I will go over the chat, over the questions that you posted to chat, and I will try to answer as many of them as possible. And I remind you that if you have additional questions, we have Slack channel, or you can just ping me on Twitter. I will try to pay more attention to Twitter mentions over the next, let's say 24 hours. So thank you very much. I can hear you. I can see you. I hope that you're sitting in your chair and you're applauding because I gave outstanding presentation, but maybe I just bombed it totally and you're like asleep, or maybe I'm just talking to myself and no one listens now. So folks, thank you very much. Let me know how it was, maybe on Twitter, just so I know if it was interesting, useful, or it was not very interesting and not very useful. Okay.
Thanks so much. Thanks
I'm
so
done,
much,
and we'll proceed to questions.
Yeah, thanks so much, Vasiliy. If you could
I will
scroll up in the
understand
chat.
how to work with it. Okay.
If you could scroll up in the chat, you can see there's questions that are posed.
By the way, big thanks to Sean. Sean helped me with all this technical stuff, and behind the scenes, he managed all of that. So probably he provided services while I was freestyling. So thanks, Sean. That's really interesting format.
No problem.
I'm you there. Thanks. Multi-binding unnecessary complicated. Yeah, it was horrible. 20 minutes left. Yeah, thanks, Sean. How to use Hilt? Delete everything. It works like magic. Yep. Until you run into like stuff like a Fragment Factory, it really works like magic. I expect for new Android developers who won't need to dive into all the complexity of Dagger 2 and will be able to just, follow a recipe and get working dependency injection in their projects. That will be a big win. And again, standardization. I don't like the idea of Hilt. I don't like the annotation processors, but if in 1-2 years, you can be reasonably sure that you join a new project and you can immediately understand what they did with the dependency injection setup. That's a big win. That's worth it, in my opinion. Sorcery, yes. Magic, mindless copying and pasting. Story of my life. Yeah, we are all developers. That's what we do. Feel free to start posting